Greetings. This is Anthony Fletcher speaking. I am the chair of the business law section of the New York State Bar Association, and I'd like to welcome each of you to our inaugural Fireside Chat, which is a series of interviews that will be conducted between notable personalities in business and law. The idea was originally conceived by the business law section's diversity chair, Ms. Taya Graves, who I'd like to thank for recruiting today's guest. Also, I'd like to thank the leadership of the Dominican Bar Association for agreeing to sponsor with the business law section of the New York State Bar Association today's event. And lastly, I'd like to thank all personnel at the New York State Bar Association and the Dominican Bar Association for making today's program possible. Today's guest is Sid Wilson. Since 2014, Sid Wilson has been the president and chief executive officer of the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility. Wilson has more than 20 years of corporate finance and Wall Street equity research experience. At the Association on Corporate Responsibility, he manages a staff nationwide that works closely with corporate board members, Hispanic organizations, and corporate partners to increase the representation of Hispanics at all levels in corporate America. Additionally, Wilson directs programs and initiatives aimed at encouraging Fortune 500 companies to include Hispanics in the areas of employment, procurement, and corporate governance. In the past, Wilson has been featured and quoted in numerous publications and by the news media, including the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, the New York Times, and Bloomberg TV. In 2004, he graced the cover of Black Enterprise magazine, and in 2017, he was featured on Money magazine. Most recently, he shared the cover of Latino magazine with the chair and CEO of General Motors Company, Mary Barra. In 2009, President Barack Obama appointed Mr. Wilson to the National Museum of the American Latino Study Commission, which proposed to the President and Congress the construction of a new Smithsonian Museum on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Subsequently, he was named board chair of the Friends of the National Museum of the American Latino in 2012 and continues to lead the advocacy efforts aimed at sustaining congressional support for the museum's completion. Mr. Wilson holds a degree in economics from Ohio State University. Mr. Wilson, welcome.
Thank you, Anthony. Great to be here, and of course, my thanks to you and the New York State Bar Association, and also to Taya Graves and to the DBA President Doreen de Dios for this opportunity to have this dialogue with you.
Thank you for your time today. So I wanted to start initially by asking you about your background, if you don't mind sharing with us, of course, where you're from, where you've lived over the years, and what you've done since college, ultimately.
Well, thank you, Anthony, and I'll try to give the Cliff Notes version of this, but I'm a New York born. I was born in Washington Heights, New York City, raised in New Jersey, where I've lived most of my life and where I live today. And my parents came from the Dominican Republic. My father in the 1950s and my mother in the 1960s. And they were, together they were able to open up one of the first Dominican American medical practices in the country when they opened in Washington Heights in the mid-1960s. Where they served the Dominican community for over 40 years. And I share that because that kind of is a foundation of of who I am, not only as a proud Dominican American, but also as a very proud Afro-Latino. Most Dominicans have African ancestry, and not only in our blood, but also in our heritage that is also Afrocentric. And so that allowed me to to not only share that pride in terms of what I do within the community, but also what I do professionally. After I graduated from The Ohio State University, I took a job working in the mailroom at a Wall Street investment firm because my dream was to work on Wall Street, but nobody would hire me. I didn't go to Harvard, I didn't go to Yale, I didn't go to Wharton, I didn't go to Stanford, and but I felt that if given the opportunity, that I could succeed. So thanks to the benefit of sponsorship, and I'm referring to professional sponsorship, where someone actually mentors you and eventually they become a sponsor and talk about you. I was able to go from a mailroom to an assistant to an associate to junior analyst, senior analyst to managing director and director of research. And then in 2006, Forbes had its ranking of its best Wall Street analysts in each of their fields. And in my field of specialization, I was ranked #1 financial analyst in the country. And that along with my commitment to being involved in the community, first within the Dominican community, and then of course within the greater Latino and Black communities, and then eventually, getting involved with organizations like Dominicans on Wall Street, or Latino Justice PERLDA, formerly the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, where I'm still on the board of directors today, and many other organizations that have that common theme of making sure that we illuminate and empower our communities of color in a country that unfortunately has historically not treated people of color equally.
Thank you kindly for that background, and congratulations to your success. That's quite a career trajectory, from the mailroom to, really the forefront of what you're now doing. May I call you Sid?
Sure, you can, absolutely.
Okay, and my understanding when we spoke off camera was that your organization is frequently referred to as HACER.
Yes, that is correct. The Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, affectionately known as HACER, it's HACR in Espanol. We've been around for 34 years. I've been the president and CEO for the last 6 years. I've also hit a milestone. I'm the nation's first Afro-Latino CEO of any national Hispanic organization in the country. And our mission is to advance Hispanic inclusion in corporate America. And that requires us to be out there in the public, talking to corporations, including a lot of corporate councils, on why it's so important to have Hispanic inclusion at all levels of companies. So that's why partnerships with the Dominican Bar Association, the Hispanic National Bar Association, many of the regional Hispanic bar associations around the country is so important, because while they're doing great work to make sure that we do have more Latino lawyers and Latino judges, we have a lot in common in the importance of having more diversity and inclusion in the offices of the general counsels within corporate America. But of course, we do that through leadership programs, as well as our connections with companies. We have over 85 Fortune 500 companies that are our corporate members. And of course, we do a lot of things, including our Corporate Inclusion Index, which is our corporate accountability tool that companies do to measure how are they doing when it comes to Hispanic inclusion at their companies. And then together with a very impactful board of directors, my board is not individuals. There are actually 14 of our nation's leading Hispanic organizations, and the CEOs are my board directors. So we'd speak in a very unified voice when it comes to advancing Hispanic inclusion in corporate America.
Sid, thank you for that important background. Once again, most relevant. I think my question is, obviously coming from Wall Street, you had the benefit of a number of options. Why did you decide to enter into advocacy work, if you don't mind me asking?
Sure. Well, a lot of it had to do with my passion. I was very blessed that I had an excellent 21-year Wall Street career. But you'll also know that during that Wall Street career, I was on the board of trustees at Bergen Community College in New Jersey when I had met what turned out to be my first dreamer, an undocumented student who came at the age of 10 from Ecuador and expressed her serious concern about being a dreamer in New Jersey. That prompted me to, to leverage my role being on the board of directors at Bergen Community College to advocate for to have an environment, an academic environment that's more belonging. And so Bergen Community College was effectively like a sanctuary community college in terms of being welcoming for dreamers. But there are 19 community colleges in New Jersey, and there are multiple four-year colleges. So while I was doing my normal Wall Street work of analyzing companies and doing what you normally do and giving buy, sell, hold recommendations and talking to portfolio managers, I was also traveling back and forth to Trenton, New Jersey, advocating for the DREAM Act. And so I'm proud that literally just 7 months before I took my current role, we were successful in getting the New Jersey DREAM Act passed into law, and now in the state of New Jersey, thanks to the advocacy not only of these dreamers, but leaders like me and others who were very passionate about this, that in New Jersey, the DREAM Act of New Jersey is a law of the state, and no one can ever have to worry about going to college in New Jersey and being turned away because of their immigration status. And so when this role presented itself and I was encouraged to consider it, it was an opportunity to take what was already a passion of mine to advocate for Latinos, Blacks, people of color, in a way that you channel my knowledge of Wall Street, my knowledge of how corporate America functions, with speaking a language that CEOs understand when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So that prompted me to say, this is about giving back, and I'm a believer that when you succeed, you give back, but when you give back, you succeed, and that prompted my decision to go from Wall Street to leading one of our leading nonprofit organizations focused on advancing Hispanic inclusion in corporate America, as I said.
Phenomenal. So as I understand it, you really had a dual career. Not only were you working actively on Wall Street, continuing in your success, but you also were pursuing, the work of an advocate to further advance the goals of not only your community, but its progress within corporate America. So you've always had a dual agenda. So this is the perfect synthesis, it seems, for precisely the direction you were gravitating towards. So this is a natural fit, indeed.
It was, yes. And I should say it was, and that's why for me, it didn't feel like it didn't feel like a career change. It felt more like a sharpening of my career trajectory, because I still talk to the same CEOs that I did when I was on Wall Street. I still talk to the same COOs, CFOs. The difference is that once you get below that C-suite level, where I used to talk to the head of investor relations, Now I'm talking to the chief diversity officers.
Understood, understood. So let's narrow in a little bit on what Hasir has been doing. If you don't mind, tell me how you've been celebrating or engaging in outreach to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, and also what you generally do throughout the year to advance the mission of your organization.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. That's a great question because the work that we do is very multi-pronged. We execute our mission through our programs, through our advocacy, and through our research. And real briefly with our programs, we, for the last 28 years, we organize an annual symposium, which is a best practice conference where companies can come and share and exchange and learn about practices when it comes to advancing Hispanic inclusion in corporate America. We just wrapped up our 28th annual symposium, which we did this past September in the heart of Hispanic Heritage Month. And of course, given the COVID-19 pandemic, we did it virtually, but in a way, it was very successful because we were able to connect with more Latinos who work in corporate America who may not have been able to travel to our conference as they normally would. But we also have leadership advancement programs depending on where you are within the company, whether you're a mid-level manager, a senior manager, or an executive, or even someone that serves on a corporate board. But that's just the programmatic side. There is also the advocacy side. As I mentioned, we have our Corporate Inclusion Index, which is our corporate accountability tool. Companies participate. We give them a star ranking, with 5 being the most that you can get, a 5-star ranking. And but companies that take this as a way to help us to help them when it comes to moving the needle, when it comes to advancing Hispanic inclusion. And then lastly is the advocacy part. We're constantly producing research that really strengthens that case of why it's so important that we advance Hispanic inclusion in corporate America. And Anthony, I'll just give you one example.
Please.
Last January, I was a perimeter panelist speaker at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. And a great honor. We were one of the first Hispanic organizations ever to really have a presence in Davos. And this is certainly one of the most prestigious gatherings in the whole world. But I made this case. I said, if I named you a country that you could invest or you could expand globally into this country that has the following characteristics: the 8th largest economy in the world, that is dollar denominated, that has a low interest rate environment, that has a strong regulatory environment, that is AAA rated as a bond rating, and that is growing faster than every single developed country in the world and growing faster than many developing countries in the world. Would you expand your business into that country? Of course, everyone says, of course I would. Well, I just described to you the nearly 60 million strong Hispanic community in America. And of course, when we think about that we're just coming off our high season of Hispanic Heritage Month, and recognizing that throughout the year, corporate America can not only do well by thinking about Hispanic inclusion, but it's also smart business. It makes the case that of why more needs to be done when it comes to Hispanic inclusion. But I made the case that investing in the Hispanic community could get you greater ROI than your globalization strategy. And so when you're thinking about your globalization strategy, I would say take those globalization dollars and invest it in diversity and inclusion overall, and you actually may get greater ROI.
Remarkable again. I mean, to appear at Davos first, in the live, and be in the position naturally to push or advance the organization's agenda, I'm sure was a joy. Most of us, of course, have to watch Davos on television, which is what I did last year. But I'm curious, what a remarkable succession of events that you described over the last year and a half. When you have an opportunity to come into communication with a CEO or someone who's a general counsel at one of these major corporations, whether it's there at or at another conference or at another occasion, whether you're lecturing or serving as a panelist, I'm curious, how do you succinctly describe your predominant mission? I mean, what end goal do we have for HASER? And tell me, if you would, how receptive these individuals have been by and large over the years.
So thank you for that question, because it's a very good question, and the answer varies. When I interact with dozens and dozens of CEOs throughout the year, and I'm also proud to serve on the steering committee for the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. I've been involved with that movement for the last 3 years, and I'm actually now on the governing committee for the newly launched CEO Action for Racial Equity, which is an outgrowth of the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, a key component for this. And one of the reasons why I'm so deeply involved in this is that part of how you make change to create a culture of belonging in corporate America starts with the chief executive officer and the board of directors. While I shared all those strong statistics about Hispanics in corporate America, the reality is that when you look at the number of Latinos that serve on Fortune 500 corporate boards, it is only at 3% representation on Fortune 500 corporate boards. And if you're Latina, it's only 0.8%. And when you look at how many Latinos are serving as general counsels, according to statistics from the Hispanic National Bar Association, I believe the number is about 18 out of 500. And so it means that there is a long ways to go to advance Hispanic inclusion. But one of the things that you mentioned in terms of like how we do this is recognizing that when you get to the executive positions, you don't get there solely because of your qualifications. You got there because somebody sponsored you. And there is great power in what I call intentional sponsorship, something that we promote within corporate America. When you are thinking about who you're going to sponsor, and I know that Ken Frazier, the CEO from Merck, gave a speech a little over a year ago that I attended, and he actually talked about how he was sponsored into his current role as chairman and CEO for Merck, not by his predecessor, but by the predecessor before that one, who identified him and put him on that path. When you look at a Ken Chenault, the former chairman and CEO for American Express, he talks about how through the power of sponsorship, his predecessor named him and sponsored him to become president and chief operating officer, and then publicly said, "This is my successor. This person will be the new CEO for American Express," and that's what happened. And Oscar Munoz, who got onto the board of directors at United Airlines, and through sponsorship, and then through the power of that sponsorship, he became the president and chief executive officer. Many examples that I can give of how executive leadership needs to think about intentional sponsorship as a way to address these very low number of not just Latinos, but people of color and women, and especially women of color who are not visible in these high-ranking positions. And so there's a lot of work for me to do, and those are the kind of conversations that I'm having with CEOs and their board of directors.
So your view is most certainly in order to achieve these end goals, it really has to come from the top down. There's no question that senior executives and the CEO and president himself or herself must be charged with the obligation to advance diversity and professional mobility within the workplace.
It does. It's because what happens is that when diversity and inclusion is championed at the CEO and the board level, then it becomes a system-wide priority. There are some companies that do a great job of treating their chief diversity officers like the quarterback that navigates the entire diversity and inclusion initiatives, partnering with different department leaders who are all part of the movement to advance Hispanic inclusion. Unfortunately, there are examples where companies will say, I'm going to hire someone that leads diversity as a checkbox, and that this is all your problem. You solve this. I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. And that does not solve the issue. It doesn't change the culture. It doesn't create a sense of belonging. And quite frankly, it disempowers those at the company who are committed to advancing Hispanic inclusion. So you must have a culture of belonging. I like to call it D times I, or D times I squared. Diversity multiplied by inclusion, multiplied by intentionality. And we know from math that anything times 0 equals 0. So you can't talk about diversity, you can't wish for inclusion if you don't do anything actionable, and that's where intentionality comes in.
Wow, what a remarkable viewpoint. It's clear, of course, that your experience bears this fact out. And then that's what's so helpful. Then let me ask this, if you don't mind. You know, as you full well know, the Black and Brown communities of America are always lagging well behind in our ability to compete socioeconomically, in terms of credentials and college admissions. Do we have the workforce that can facilitate professional mobility within the workplace at high levels? Or is it few and far between, which makes it, very hard for us to get to that top level? When you mentioned Ken Frazier, of course, I know that he was an attorney and was formerly at Merck, the general counsel, but there are so few of us that can compete at that level. I think my question becomes, how are we enabling and ensuring that those who need the skills have the skills for recruitment and successful retention by these corporate firms?
So I'd like to answer that in a couple of ways. Let's first start with the opportunity to compete. One of the big challenges that we have is that we have ample Latinos, ample African American, ample women and people of color, or Asian Americans, or others that are from underrepresented communities that have the ability to compete, but are never given the opportunity to show what they can do. I'm a walking, living, breathing example that, had it not been for a senior vice president who discovered me in the mailroom, I would not be talking to you today, because I would never have been given the chance to show that I could be not only a competitive analyst, but a #1 ranked Wall Street financial analyst. And that happened because someone was intentional in saying that Wall Street does not have enough people of color in these very competitive roles, whether it's investment research or equity research or investment banking, and he was very, very intentional. And how many people just like me are out there who, if given the chance to be general counsel, who could be a potential CEO or a potential COO or a board director, if only given that chance. And that's where corporate America needs to do better. And let me just say that while my focus is on corporate America, I know that there are many in the audience who are in law firms. The same applies for law firms. If given that opportunity to become a law partner or a shareholder or an executive partner, these are things that when given those chances, we can compete. But the problem is that sometimes, and this is sometimes makes people scratch their head, but this is very true. Sometimes companies will guard their culture even at the expense of guarding profit opportunity. What I mean by that is that if you know that diversity and inclusion can accelerate your business, can make your employees feel a greater sense of belonging, thus reducing the turnover and making them not only feel that they belong at this company, but it makes them feel more effective. That all these things that could yield positive return on not only return on assets, return on equity, possible profit growth, and even greater valuation. That some companies will still say, well, I've had this culture for the last 50 to 100 years, and this is how we have been doing it. And we're not going to change that culture, even if doing so is a positive one. And that is a challenge that we continue to see within corporate America, especially in the B2B businesses, where they're not as consumer sensitive compared to the B2C companies. So this is something that we continue to advocate. But but in terms of the question, are there enough qualified Latinos out there? The answer is absolutely they are, but we should not have to wait until we are 100% qualified to take that new role when we know historically that's not how corporate America works. They, when you have the key qualifications plus someone that is a sponsor, then you know that you can be stretched into those goals, just like what happened to me. I mean, when I came out of the mailroom, like I didn't come out of the mailroom automatically ready to analyze stocks and become a Wall Street equity analyst, but my sponsor stretched me, and eventually it worked. I was number one in my field, and my team was an institutional investor All-America research team for 3 consecutive years as a runner-up. And so it's just an example that that we're there. And legal on the legal side, I serve on the board of directors of Latino Justice. We have a law-bound program that produces many lawyers into this field. But when given that opportunity, we know that more could serve as general counsels or even associates or deputy general counsels. They're ready to go, but corporate America needs to be intentional with their sponsorship.
Well, that said, and thank you for your response, does your organization, HACER, assist in the development of that pipeline? How do you respond to inquiries made of, Sid, we'd very much like this kind of corporate professional, but we're having a tough time finding him or her among the Latino applicants? You've got to be surely in the position to provide that access and to make these links so that these individuals who are active in the recruitment efforts of organizations and corporate law firms or whatever it might be that are willing to effectuate change, to link them naturally to those who can handle the job. So share with me, if you don't mind, how Hasir pulls that off.
Sure. So we pull it off in two ways. Actually, three ways. The first is our programs. We actually have leadership advancement programs, depending on where you are within your company, so that we can help strengthen that pipeline. In fact, we actually have a program called the Leadership Pipeline Program. It's worded exactly that way, because the goal is to strengthen the pipeline from the mid-level manager roles into those executive positions. But it doesn't stop there. It also requires strong collaborations. We collaborate with just about every single major national Hispanic organization in the country. We have 14 on our board of directors who do a great job. Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers on the STEM side, Prospanica on the MBA based professional side. We have the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities that on the college executive side. And then we partner with many other organizations. Again, the Hispanic National Bar Association is a strong partner. I'm on the board of directors of Latino Justice. There's also MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. You have other organizations such as the U.S. Hispanic Leadership Institute that does leadership advancement, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute, Unidos US, formerly the National Casa Raza, LULAC, which is our nation's largest and oldest civil rights and advocacy organization, membership organization in the country, and many more. Even on the medical side, the National Hispanic Medical Association. So I can really go on and on with so many ways that we collaborate. And so when companies are saying, where do we look? I would say first thing to do is come to Hasir, because we know where to point you in that direction. But then that goes to the third part, and right. That is that the recruiting process can't be the job of just your diversity recruiters alone. If you are a company that has, let's say, 100,000 employees, and you have 200 diversity-focused recruiters, your 200 diversity recruiters cannot compete with your 900,000 9,800 employees that are not doing diversity-focused recruiting. So in other words, the companies need to embrace a culture in which all employees, whether you're an executive or whether you're a mid-level manager, or even if you're on the front line, need to think about diversity recruiting and how to hold all employees accountable to that as part of their evaluation. Because then what that does is that it begins to move the needle, so that you start asking the questions: am I recruiting in the right locations? Am I thinking about intentional sponsorship? Am I thinking about is this a culture of belonging, or are we asking our diverse hires to assimilate into a culture that is not welcoming? And so I've always advocated that it's acculturation, not assimilation. Companies must acculturate to a more diverse environment so that they can have a workforce that feels like they belong, not asking your diverse workforce to assimilate to an old culture that does not make them feel like they belong. So if you do those three prongs, I think that you can see progress in moving the needle when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity in corporate America for Latinos, Blacks, people of color, and other underrepresented groups.
I know that we only have a few more minutes at this stage, but I'm curious on the enculturation point, which you made, just a very significant point. Naturally, you and I have been socialized differently. You talked about your upbringing in the Dominican Heights of Manhattan, or Washington Heights of Manhattan, depending upon who you talk to and how forceful they are in describing their area or community. I am a member of West Harlem, and depending upon who you speak to, if it's someone white, you're likely to hear Morningside Heights, when you talk to someone Black, you're likely to hear West Harlem or Harlem. That said, I'm curious to know the following. How are these individuals that are presently occupying these positions able to bridge the gap in terms of conversation and in terms of understanding our language, since we are socialized purely markedly different?
So there are a couple of ways. One is recognizing that there is a saying that when you speak to someone in a language they understand, it goes to their head. Speak to us in our language, it goes to our heart.
Yes.
And we know that in business and in corporate, that your goal is to not only acquire customers that connect, where you connect to their heart, but also to when you're thinking about having a workforce whose heart is into the work that they do, it's going to yield positive results. But the key is that we all need to understand each other and to understand and celebrate our diversities. As an Afro-Latino, I'm very active in learning about Asian American Pacific Islanders, because that's a community that I want to know, so that I can understand and celebrate their diversities. When you look at other countries, even within Latin America, Latinos are very diverse. Again, my family coming from the Dominican Republic is very Afrocentric. But if you come from a country such as Peru, for example, it may be more indigenously centric. And so we need to understand and recognize all of our diversities, so that we can not only appreciate it, but see the value of being inclusive by having diverse groups. So I would my encouragement for those that are not from an underrepresented community is to get to know us and to come out of that comfort zone, and then also not only be an advocate for inclusion, but also be what I call an accomplice, meaning that if you're in a room and the room is all white men, you should ask yourself, why are there no women in this room? Why are there no people of color in this room? Why is diversity lacking in this room? And are we really getting the advice that we could get if without diversity? Or do we need to be intentional about having people in the room and at the table so that we can make sure that all perspectives are factored in? Because the one difference is that we bring our life experiences. You can't just read about it. Reading about it is one thing. Experience it is a whole nother. As an Afro-Latino, I know what it's like to be in a vehicle dressed casually, and a police officer is behind you. It's called driving while Black. And or the experience of what it's like when you don't feel like you're belonged or you're welcome, or sometimes the feeling of you're belonged, you're welcome, you just can't be a member. And we know what that is like. And so these kinds of experiences are things that we bring to the table along with our professional expertise. And that's why it is so important that we have greater intentionality for more diversity and inclusion in the general counsel's offices. I'll even say, even in all areas legally, in the legal profession, but also in corporate America, because we know that diversity and inclusion yields positive outcomes. And we know that there are qualified individuals ready to serve in these positions, but we must be proactive in saying that it's time for intentional inclusion so that we can create a greater sense of belonging for all of us.
Thank you for that commentary. And before we go, very quickly, how can you and I, for instance, under circumstances where I've already imparted to you where I'm from, work together? Because surely the challenges of your community and those of the Black community are analogous. I think you would agree.
Um, Absolutely. When you look at the challenges that impact both the Black and Latino communities, you'll see that there are the common challenges of systemic racism in our country. There are the continual challenges of bias that happens, both conscious and unconscious biases, and the reality is that we are stronger together, and that's why for me as a Dominican American Afro Latino, I love to say "Si se puede" and Black Lives Matters, because it's deeply important that all of us embrace the movement for a more inclusive America. And that requires coalitions, collaborations, where we can march together, lock arms together, sing hymns together, say we shall overcome together. And ultimately, as Dr. King said in his "I Have a Dream" speech, let freedom ring. And so these are things that we can that we can do. It's going to require us to be able to to work closer together and collaborate together, and don't let anyone try to divide us. There are going to be those elements that are going to try to say one versus the other, but I can tell you that we are stronger together, and even together, we still are only a fraction of the pie, and we must continue to grow that pie to make sure that not only is it our fair share, but also that that we are present and in an inclusive and equitable society.
Well, let me be clear. As chair of the business law section of the New York State Bar Association, I look forward to advancing along with you our congruent goals and ensuring that there's professional mobility and longevity for not only all of the corporations that we support or that we patronize, but also the corporations that must address these similar concerns. I think that in closing, I would say amelioration is a goal that you and I most certainly have in common. Is there anything that I have not asked you that you'd like us to know before we close for today?
I will first just to say that I'm very thankful for for the New York State Bar Association, and thank you, Anthony, for your leadership. A big thanks to the Dominican Bar Association, who we have a strong collaboration with, and I think that together we can make a difference. This has been a very difficult year that we've seen with the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, as well as what happened last year with the killings of Mexican Americans in El Paso, Texas, and certainly what happened with the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. What you're seeing as a common denominator is that together, love will always overcome hate. And all of us, regardless of our backgrounds, really do come from that foundation. And I think that together we can all make that difference so that these kinds of tragic events don't happen in the future. And I do envision that we can one day have that kind of society where these kinds of hate-driven incidents don't happen again, but we all must be able to collaborate together. So I look forward to our continued collaborations with you, with the New York State Bar Association, and many of your members, and so as we say, we shall overcome, and si se puede.
With that, I would like to congratulate you on your success. personally, as well as the success of your organization, HACER. And I look forward to having you back quite soon for us to talk about the ways in which both of our communities can work together, regardless of the umbrella under which we're pursuing our end goals. Thank you very much, Sid Wilson. Have a good day.
Thank you, Anthony. Great talking to you.
Same here, sir.